who knows the most. No one else besides maybe my INTJ friend. He's on a mission for ecclesiastical mission for the church. But I wasn't quite sure what to talk about. Leon said maybe I could talk about the channel, but I'm going to talk about why I think typology is important, and I'm going to talk about what I'm trying to do with the channel to help with that, and I'm going to hopefully make it worth your time for coming out here. So thank you for that. Who of you have heard of this book? This is Ayn Rand's The Virtue of Selfishness. Okay. A few of you? A few of you? Okay. Now, for those of you who haven't heard of this book, it's called The Virtue of Selfishness. What comes into, you don't have to tell me, but what comes into your mind when you hear a book called The Virtue of Selfishness? It's kind of a controversial title.
I wasn't going to say
slightly. To most people. She actually addresses this in the very beginning, in the introduction. Where basically she says, some people ask me why I've named the book The Virtue of Selfishness. They ask me, that's sort of a controversial title. That makes people uncomfortable, doesn't it? And she says, well, that's exactly why I chose it. So she's an INTJ, by the way. It's interesting. The reason I'm bringing it up, because she does explain why she uses the word selfishness. And I'm not going to talk about Ayn Rand, but there's a reason, so just follow me on the train of thought here. She says, in popular usage, the word selfishness is a synonym for evil. The image it conjures is of a murderous brute who tramples over piles of corpses to achieve his own ends. Yet the exact meaning and dictionary definition of the word selfishness is concern with one's own interests. This concept does not include a moral evaluation. It does not tell us whether concern with one's own interests is good or evil, nor does it tell us what constitutes man's actual interests. Now, I'm not here to tell you about Randian philosophy, because I'm not very... The reason I bring it up is half of us might say, that's interesting. You know, I'm actually on board with that. That kind of jives with me. I kind of get what she's saying. I'm good with my own interest. And then the other half basically say, that's kind of interesting. Why is she so firm on excusing her own selfishness? That's what kind of goes through the other half I've sort of seen. So hold that in your minds. I'm going to give another example. Bertrand Russell. Who's heard of Bertrand Russell? Okay, good. Who's heard of Friedrich Nietzsche? Oh, good, good. I'm glad. If you haven't heard of Friedrich Nietzsche, I'll give you a certificate saying you don't exist. Bertrand Russell wrote in A History of Western Philosophy, if any of you have read that. He basically ridicules Nietzsche to death. He did not like Nietzsche. He spends a whole chapter basically saying why he doesn't like Nietzsche, and he does it very professionally. Nietzsche, on the other hand, he never met Bertrand Russell, obviously, because Nietzsche came first, but for all intents and purposes, he wrote many passages that, when I read them, it's basically him railing on the NTP personality types. I'm going to read you a few clippings, one from Russell, basically accusing Nietzsche, and one Nietzsche accusing Russell. Russell says, Nietzsche condemns Christian love because he thinks it is an outcome of fear. It does not occur to Nietzsche as possible that a man should genuinely feel universal love, obviously because he himself almost universal hatred and fear, which he would fain disguise as lordly indifference. His noble man is himself in his daydreams. Nietzsche, on the other hand, says this, philosophers, and we could say Russell, all pose as if they had discovered and reached their opinions through the self-development of a cold, pure, divinely unconcerned dialectic, which at bottom is an assumption, a hunch, indeed a kind of inspiration, most often a desire of the heart that they defend with reasons that they have sought after the fact. The reason I've brought these interesting conflicts up, and I'll tell you that when I look at my notes and remember why. Oh, that's right. Russell's irritated with Nietzsche because he feels Nietzsche's negative about certain things. Nietzsche's irritated with Russell because he is irritated by parts of him. These are all excellent examples of why I think typology is important. Yes?
Was Nietzsche actually writing about Russell?
He was not writing about Russell, but from what I understand about Russell, having read Russell, this just applies straight to Russell, what his criticisms were here. So the reason I'm bringing this up is, this is why I think it's important, because so often we see, especially in philosophy, you look through philosophy, almost the entire history of philosophy is type accusing other type, and I just see it. Maybe I'm overgeneralizing, but you see it over and over again of NTJ, hating on the NTP, hating on the NTJ, and not really looking at their philosophies, but looking at their preferences. And we do this all the time. We make these assumptions all the time. The argument generally goes something like this: Nietzsche, or Russell, or that guy at work, or that one professor who I didn't like, or my wife even, or my husband, or my boyfriend, or my girlfriend, that other person, they keep doing this thing or saying this thing that's just stupid. I don't get why they do it, and it drives me nuts. And because I don't understand why they do it, therefore, they must be crazy, or insane, or evil. You see, that's a perfectly logical argument. I don't know if it's a valid argument. We do this all the time, and this is why I think typology is important, because it helps to transcend that. So the question that one side, going back to Ayn Rand, people asked her why, or they didn't ask her this, I asked her this, why are you so determined to defend your selfishness? When you say that, what you're really saying is you don't have a problem with Ayn Rand thinking that. What you have a problem with is when you hear Ayn Rand's philosophy, you're meta-representing her philosophy in your mind. So you're basically saying that, okay, if I were to write this about selfishness, if I were to do that with my preferences, that would mean I'm a selfish monster. That's the only way I can reason out that I would say that. But Ayn Rand doesn't think the same way that you do. So when Ayn Rand says that, it actually means something different, because Ayn Rand has a different outlook, literally different processes of thinking. So when Ayn Rand is defending selfishness and is annoyed at the way that people define selfishness, which really for her is something that you would agree with but by a different name, that is having a good heart and a moral heart and letting that guide you. And that's what Ayn Rand is doing, but just the way that she thinks, she says it in a way that when we try to represent that with our functions, we're like, that's evil, that's wrong. And it would be if it were through those functions. Is that making sense? Sure. So the question is, the FETI axis might say that, no, excuse me. So one axis would say it one way, another axis would say it the other way. Is either side right? Well, we're all MBTI people, so of course the answer is yes. Both sides of this Ayn Rand thing are correct. I have a little passage. I hope I'm not being too disjointed in the way I'm describing this, but there is a passage from, this is kind of an odd thing to bring up, but have any of you heard of the Book of Mormon?
No.
You have? The Book of Mormon?
Wait, which one? The show or the book?
No, the book. Yeah, you've probably heard of the show. You're all in New York.
It's a good show.
What's that?
It's a good show.
I've heard it's a very good show, but this is kind of an odd thing to bring up here, but I just found it worked very perfectly. This is a quote not from the show, but the actual book, the Book of Mormon, the religious book. And it's a part where there's a character named Lehi, and he's talking to his sons, or someone's describing him talking to his sons, and he says, "My father spake unto Laman, saying," this is scriptural language, please excuse me, "Oh, that thou mightest be like unto this river, continually running into the fountain of all righteousness. Then he also spake unto Lemuel, Oh, that thou mightest be like unto this valley, firm and steadfast and immovable in keeping the commandments of the Lord." So the reason I bring that up is because I thought it was fascinating that Lehi turns to one son and he says, run, work really hard, don't stand still, run as fast as you can and work as hard as you can to do good stuff. It's like in an extroverted perspective. He's saying, be the extrovert here, because I know that's your personality. Run as fast as you can to do the things. This isn't exactly extroversion, but he says that, and then he turns right around and says to the other son, don't go anywhere, stand still, introverted in what you know is right, be stubborn and don't get pushed about by every wind of doctrine. So he says it to one son, and when you read the Book of Mormon, you'll see that over and over again, this is the problem the two sons run into. The one is always purposefully going forward to do like bad things, like trying to murder people and stuff, while the other son is just wishy-washy all the time and just goes along with whatever the other son says and goes along with like murdering and stuff. So they're two sides of the same coin is the thing I'm trying to say, and that's why I think typology is important, because if he only said stand still to both sons, it wouldn't exactly work because they both have different processes going on. And that's something I see over and over again in philosophy, and I see over and over again with people trying to instruct other people, is if you come from different preferences and you don't at least take that somewhat into account, it's hard to take it all the way into account, but you don't take it somewhat into account, you may end up giving advice that makes sense for you in your context, but doesn't make sense for them. Even though you're both trying to end up doing the same good thing, when they try to meta-represent it, it doesn't quite work. I'm not doing the best job of explaining this. I'm kind of doing the Michel Foucault thing, like if you've seen that picture. But the other thing I wanted to say, once I look at my little handy note card here, two things I think typology is important for. Okay. To determine which side of the coin that we are on at any point in time, which function axes or which side of the function axes we are coming from at a certain point of time. For instance, Ayn Rand is coming from the TEFI side, so she's thinking in terms of, I want to have certain desires and I want those to be good desires, and then you have the other side, the FETI side, coming, who's saying that I want to sacrifice my desires for the good of other people. And those are both good things, and they're both two sides of the same coin. You go through school and you'll see posters in the hallways that one will say, follow your heart, and then the other side will say, sacrifice for others. And those don't jive together, even though they're both aiming at the same thing. So one thing typology I think is good for is it can analyze that, and it can tell you, it gives you a framework that, it's one of many frameworks, but I think it's the best framework you can use to analyze that and see which side of the coin someone's coming from, and know, okay, how can we really get here without not understanding each other? There's actually a quote from, I think this sums up kind of what I'm trying to say. There's a quote from Joseph Smith Jr. If you haven't guessed, I'm a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. I'm a Mormon. That's why I'm quoting from the Book of Mormon. But Joseph Smith made an interesting... What's that?
It's the South Park joke. You picked the right one.
I know that. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah. But Joseph Smith Jr. had a quote where he said, he was very much a reformer, if you want to call him that. What many people call sin is not sin. And he says, and then the implication being that there are many things that people don't call sin that are sin. But the point is, he was trying to break down superstition. And he felt, I apply that here not because I'm talking about sin, but because there's many things that, because of the preferences we come from, we say to ourselves, we work it up in our heart that naming a book The Virtue of Selfishness is wrong. This is already inferior to my way of thinking. And it may be. I'm not trying to propose a totally moral, relativistic way of thinking of things, but I have to read the book first. And but reading the book, I find that Ayn Rand's way of thinking is not inferior to mine. It's just a different way. Yes, sorry.
I was thinking she just did that for marketing. One
okay.
One of the other books
Follow me pretending it was.
really controversial was like by Marquis de Sade, like the benefits of the misfortunes of virtue and the benefits of vice, which like totally goes against like what people think. But then like he like tells stories and lots of stuff.
There's a shock factor too.
Yeah, it's a shock factor. That's
true.
Basically.
That's true. But are there any more questions before I go on anywhere? Yes.
How do you reconcile those two disparate sources of philosophy?
Very good question. Yeah, how do you, I figured you were all going to ask me that. Now, let me, because that is the big question, and that is the embarrassing point, because the truth of the matter is, I haven't figured that part out yet. I know that typology... Oh, sorry. The question he was asking, which is sort of the obvious question, is, okay, we have two sides of the same coin. How do we reconcile those? We've kind of got these two opinions. How do we get them to mesh? Is there any way to get them to mesh, or are we kind of doomed?
Well, I think they're more like preferences, like what flavor do you like, or what color do you like? I mean, you can't say like, one color is better than the other,
right?
But they're just like personal preferences. then it's not something like in terms of reality that needs to be reconciled.
Right. Let me tell oh yeah, sorry.
Go ahead.
Oh, are you sure? Are you sure?
Oh yeah, I'll save it.
Okay. Let me tell a story that I think might help to answer this question the way that I'm going. But I'm going to be honest that I haven't really figured out any real way to, other than to just work with it. But our family, having looked at our family and looked at what likely the personality preferences are in my family. Am I good on time, by the way? Sorry.
Okay.
I'm good? Okay. I've noticed that the FETI axis is fairly prominent in every individual in my family except for one, and it's my older brother. He's smiling back there because he knows how this goes. I wasn't sure if he'd be smiling or be like, why are you telling this story? My older brother demonstrates the TEFI axis. He identifies with INFP. This actually, it's kind of remarkable because growing up, this actually caused a fair amount of trouble in my family. Let me try to describe that because he, and I'm not making declarations about INFPs, this is just how he expressed it, but he wanted to know what was right for him to do. He wanted to know what do I want to do. He wanted to follow his heart, kind of, and when he figured out and made the judgment of what he knew was right, there wasn't any persuading we could do, and this ground against us because the way that the rest of us thought, having the FETI axis, is we wanted his principles to be logical. Were you going to ask something? But so for instance, he would say, I want to go play rugby with a bunch of giant Samoans. He's like, I think that's a great idea, and he's about the same frame as me. And he's like, he thought, well, that wasn't exactly, but he thought this was a fine idea. He thought it was invincible, and that he was going to go do this, and it would be great. And he loved the Samoans because he's just that way. He's a wonderful person. He ended up getting smacked in the face and put in the hospital and nearly lost his eye. Is how that story ends. But that's not the point of the story. The point of the story is that by this time, my parents had so many instances of him saying, I want to do this because I know it's the thing I want to do, or I want to do this because I feel it's the thing they want to do. And them trying, really grinding against them because they didn't know how to, I don't know exactly how to argue against that because I'm sorry I'm bringing you this, my father is an INTP and one of the hallmarks is you want a logical reason why you're doing this. You want to be rational. And it's not that he wasn't being rational, but it's that he doesn't care about feelings. And I don't care about feelings to a certain extent in the sense that he was talking about them. I'm not doing the best job of explaining this, but there was a lot of friction there. Me and my brother, we get along a lot better now than we did. As kids, we did not get along very well at all, and we've managed to reconcile a bit. It's a little awkward still, but this is why I think typology is important, because I want to figure out better how we can change our way of behaving to be able to accommodate these things better. I haven't figured it out, but I think the biggest main step is just being able to understand it, and understand that A, my brother's not crazy. B, he's not stupid. He's no more stupid than I'm stupid. There are things that I do that drive him crazy, and he's like, that's gonna end you up in a stupid situation, and I don't get it, but then there's things he does that I just think in my head, why are you playing with these big Samoans? And he's like, why are you sitting in your room on your computer making little videos? He didn't, that's not a good example, he didn't make fun of that, but I think the biggest step that typology at least helps is the understanding and actually being able to recognize Friedrich Nietzsche's not crazy, Bertrand Russell's not crazy, maybe we can get together and work as long as we know we're not crazy. Yes?
Friedrich Nietzsche lost his mind.
He did. At the end of his life, Bertrand Russell, you could argue the point that he was a little crazy too, but okay, maybe that's not the best example. But Ayn Rand, not crazy. Okay.
And that's also it's a little biased. That's a little biased too, because is someone who's primarily intuitive. So my sister is an INTP, So she had a problem with Nietzsche going crazy, or writing in a crazy fashion.
Yeah.
Because it's not rational. So she says they can't be legitimate. These two must be just crazy.
Nietzsche was trying to be authentic, and Bertrand Russell looks at that and he's like, "That's dumb. You should be as rational as possible." Yes.
What type was Nietzsche?
Most people identify him as INTJ. I agree with that very much. Yeah.
I think a very practical point, which speaks to what you're talking about with like understanding other types, is what I call the flexibility question. So the idea is that you have a type, you're fairly certain about it, you have the information in front of you. So this question comes about, well, what should I do with this? Should I try to control it and monopolize it? Like if I'm an INFJ and I have a repressed SE, should I try to develop it? How can I do that, if I can do that? And the other side of that is people who will say, don't even worry about that. You're never going to get a career if you worry about trying to develop all these shadow functions. Just focus on your strengths and you'll be good. But the problem with that being is that when you do that, you get old. So you kind of have these two things going on.
So follow or fight your destiny?
Yeah, in a way, I guess you could say. My own personal experience with this might be a little bit weird, but it's kind of the idea of the way out is through. So you're not rejecting your personality traits. I mean, you have to be you. You have to be who you are. There's a sort of rightness about it. But at the same time, there's a sort of call for you need to step out. Like if you are an INFJ and you have difficulty with problematic or inherently disturbing parts of life, maybe you should read Nietzsche. Maybe you should, because it's good to be minded of that kind of thing if you're an INFJ. So what happens is you don't give up your personality, but it kind of like, I don't know, it expands a little bit. It's probably a little bit out of my range to talk about.
I think I know what you're...
Hear what I'm getting at?
Because I don't know if everyone was able to hear that, or I'll stop me if I'm not representing you properly. But he was bringing up the point of the problem of reconciling the two points of view, except you were saying that not even that, but also with just your own personality, the dichotomy of your dominant function and your inferior function, how do you reconcile those? Because some people say that you should do certain things to develop your more inferior functions, and then some people, myself actually included sometimes, but I'm not set on that, say not to worry about it. And his point was that we have to figure out how to do both. We need to emphasize our own personality and our own traits, but we need to also step out of that box to a certain degree. Is that a?
I mean, it's hard for me to formulate myself. So,
yeah.
But it's just an idea, just sort of a point of thinking about it. Is that very practical question that sometimes it comes up in psychology.
Yeah.
Is the whole flexibility thing.
Yeah.
I think it's a thing.
Yeah.
May I?
Yeah.
I think it's important to distinguish between, so just to use INFJ as an example, I think there's a world of difference between an INFJ developing TI and SE as opposed to trying to develop SI and TE. The socionicsy people among us would think that there is great utility in developing the literal shadow functions. But I think it's important to distinguish between developing the tertiary and the inferior versus things that, according to Myers-Briggs, are virtually absent.
Yeah. Actually, that's a good point because it clarifies something for me. It's not when you're dealing with the shadow functions. Mm-hmm. It's not so much developing as it is like you're adopting a role. Like I know I'm not like this, but I'm going to act like it anyway.
All right, fair enough.
I mean, for what it's worth.
Are there any other questions before I wrap up?
So, for that question, if you go by John B, there's a MBTI specialist called John B. He says actually it is important to develop your shadow functions. And if you're an INFJ, you know that's you have FI is that as your sixth function, according to the Myers-Briggs. According to John B., your type tends to view it as the witch or warlock. But you get to transform it and look at it as your wise man, wise woman. Because I want to be looked at that way, because I'm an INFJ with FI. But like my sixth function is NI, so I might look at NI as the witch or warlock, but I can switch it over and look at it as the wise person. So there is something you can develop that.
So we're working on that question, but I think as I've said like 7 times now, I think the biggest jump is the being able to understand. To be able to understand the typology and be able to at least understand that we can at least try to figure how to work something out. And that's what I'm trying to do with the channel. When I started it, for those of you who have seen it, I've at least tried to lay down the definitions more in stone of what the functions are supposed to mean. And that's kind of why I started it, because I felt I had trouble finding places that said this is what this function is, this is what this is, and because everybody used different definitions, and I'm starting to do that a bit myself, but that's originally what I was trying to do with the channel, to help people out with that, so it wasn't so confusing. But thank you all for coming out to listen to me speak. I hope that was enlightening to you and worth your time. Thank you for your comments, and see you all later.
You want to give another person a round of applause? We have a gift for Mike. So I got this, but I was reading it a bit, and I accidentally wrote on one of the pages. I was like, oh, oops, I wrote on one of the pages. So one of the pages has the markings, but
that's okay. Literally all my books are from used bookstores. They all have markings.
Yes. Okay, this is someone passed me the donation.
Thank you.
Box, red box. So collecting donations for this, because